and welcome to Apologiaforum 2025. Here we are with our main speaker, Mr. Jordan B. Cooper. Welcome.
Thank you.
You gave such a fascinating talk as an opening, and you also mentioned in your talk that your personal work involves philosophical theology. So could you just tell us what does that mean and why is it important?
Yeah, sure. So the work that I've done particularly is in Lutheran theology and the use of classical philosophy within early Lutheran theology. And you know, I think philosophy and theology relate to each other. And in some ways, you can't really address one subject without addressing the other. So that's not to say that they're exactly identical. You know, they're not precisely the same. They deal with different things. But when you're doing theology, you always have certain assumptions about things, like the way you're using words, what terms mean, how you perceive of the nature of reality, that really plays a significant role in how you formulate your theology. So what actually led me to this path was starting to study particular doctrines that I was really interested in. Particularly, it was the doctrine of union with Christ. And I noticed a lot of shifts in this particular doctrine in the 20th century, and I started to ask just like, well, why did this change happen? Why did people stop talking about this? And when I discovered the reason, what I found was actually there was a big philosophical shift, and then those philosophical assumptions started to shape how people were reading Scripture. They were shaping how people were reading the theological sources that they were reading, particularly Luther on this issue. And so it was really a study of one doctrine that got me to see that like these things are so deeply related that I think a lot of times we don't step back and ask the basic questions. And that's not just true in theology, that's true in a lot of areas of life. And sometimes we need to step back and ask, what are my assumptions about this or that? And so your answers to philosophical questions are always going to impact your theology. So what I always say is that it's not a matter of having a philosophy or not having a philosophy. It's a matter of whether you're aware of your philosophy or not. Because we all operate with assumptions that we've just gotten from culture, we've gotten from our families or things that have been taught to us, even that we don't always recognize. And philosophy really helps us to discover what those are. And it can either cause us to challenge them, or it can help us to reinforce those things and say, yes, I think that those assumptions are correct.
Thank you. And now that we have an outlook on why philosophy is important and also important for your work, let us talk about your talk. So in your topic, you included the question, what is natural law? So what is it? What does it mean?
Yeah, sure. What is natural law? Well, this idea of natural law is one that extends pretty far back in like the theological and philosophical tradition as well. And this is the notion that there is a moral law that is inherent within nature. And so we understand that there's objectivity in scientific laws, right? So that there are things work in a certain way. There's certain like principles of physics that you can't just change. They're inherent to the way that nature works. And so the idea of natural law is to say that moral law works in that same way. That there are just these underlying universal principles of what is right and what is wrong. So a lot of Christian theologians have operated with this idea of natural law, which is then distinguished from what we call revealed law. So natural law is law as it's discovered by reason, and then the revealed law is the law as God has revealed it in specificity, like in the Ten Commandments or in other places in Scripture. And by making that distinction, we're not saying that they're two different laws. We're saying they're the same thing. But the natural law is that same law, but it's given in such a way that human beings have an innate sense of right and wrong, even if they've never heard the name Jesus. Right? Even without Scripture, it doesn't mean their sense of morality is perfect, but it does mean that they have this innate sense of some things being right and some things being wrong. And so we can talk about that in a twofold way. There is an innate sense of natural law, which is the law of the conscience, and then we have the acquired sense of natural law, which is through reason. We can reason based on moral principles to various truths. And so God has gifted us with reason in such a way that reason certainly can't discover everything, and reason in a situation where you have sinful beings is distorted, of course, and it's used to serve sinful ends often, but reason also can still serve a good in that moral sense.
So those questions lead us to another question on what is a human being, and so that somehow relates also to the pondering on natural law. But why is the basic question of what is a human, why is it so important?
Yeah, sure. Let me just maybe make a point first about what's connected between law, moral law, and natural law, and human nature. The question of what is the nature of a thing, of anything, and what does it do are deeply related questions. And to answer one is to answer the other one. What is the purpose of something? So I used the example of a chair as I was giving this talk for different things. But if you think about like a chair, you can ask, well, what defines what a chair is? What is the essence of a chair? And you could describe things about, maybe it has legs or it has this kind of surface. And like any of those aspects of a chair, if you try to make them absolute, it's pretty hard to actually come up with a definition that actually fits all of the chairs. But you know what one universal principle makes a chair is that it can be sat on, right? Its purpose. So its essence and purpose are united, right? It is a chair because it's a thing that is meant to be sat on, and that's what it does. And if it looks kind of like a chair, but you can't sit on it, it's not a chair, right? So we think about this in natural things and all sorts of things. So the question of what are we to do flows out of that question of who are we? And also the question of who are we also is sometimes our understanding of who we are flows out of our understanding of what we are to do. So human nature and the moral law that's attached to nature are deeply intertwined. But the question of why, of human nature, like why is that so important, is one because of that, right? Because of this connection, if I have, the understanding I have of myself certainly is going to impact my understanding of what my obligations are. What is the end toward which my life should be directed? What's the goal? What's the point? Right? If you don't understand nature, then you don't understand what the point of your life is. And then there's also this deep connection between understanding of who we are and who God is. And so, you know, if we understand ourselves, say, as I am a being of perfection who has nothing wrong with me, well, that is certainly going to affect how I view God and my need for Him. If I understand myself to, say, be a deeply flawed individual who knows that I have a goal that I want to strive for and something I want to be, but I can't do it, well, then that reveals something about what I need from God and what God has destined to give to me, which is perfection from outside of me, right? That we find in the gospel. So, so this is your answer to this question of what is human nature. Really is going to impact almost everything about how you view everything.
That is so true, and you also claimed in your talk that it's kind of like a fundamental problem in modern philosophy that we have kind of like lost the notion that any such thing as a human nature exists. So why is that such a fundamental problem?
Yeah. So a lot of I'd say modern philosophy, and this problem really starts in some ways all the way back in the 17th century in some ways, that people start thinking about themselves in very different ways that they had in the past, and really approaching nature as a whole, human nature and nature, all of nature, with a position of skepticism, of questioning reality. And when you start to question reality, or you start to think that your nature is not something that is inherent or that can really be known, well, then you don't really have any understanding of your purpose, right? Because if you can't really know your nature, or if your nature is something that is constructed socially, or your nature is just a biological thing and that's all that it is, there's nothing beyond that reality, then that's going to, I think, ultimately lead you to be in a position of either being in just total crisis because you have no purpose, and human beings are purposive creatures. We exist for purpose. We live for purpose. We act based on what we see purpose as in our lives. We're always driven by and towards something. So if you don't have that, you're going to be miserable. Or the other option there is to say that if we don't know what our purpose is, or we don't really have one, then we just need to kind of make it up, or we need to just figure it out. And then that, again, really, I think, leads to a crisis. I think this is what we see with a lot of people today. I think we You see like depression rates in Gen Z right now are skyrocketing. They have been for quite a long time. And I think one of the reasons for that is there's such a focus on inner authenticity, finding your meaning in yourself, or being your authentic self. And the fact is, this gives so much anxiety, because then it's like you don't fit into some broader picture where you have a clear role, you have a clear meaning, you have a clear purpose. Now it's just up to you to figure it out. And I don't think we're meant to live like that as human beings. And I think that the crisis we're having in a lot of ways now really flows out of that problem.
So, continuing from that, and on the theme of objectivity, you mentioned the three transcendentals. And so, as they are also fundamental for this interview, could you describe what are they and why are they so important?
Yeah, so the three transcendentals, as we define them, this is kind of a summary way to describe a conviction of classical Christian philosophy. So these are things that exist, they're elements of reality, but also exist beyond our reality. Yep. Right? They're not just physical things. They're things that are universal. In other words, they don't like change all the time. They're not purely subjective. They're objective. But they are also things that are deeply intertwined within our subjective experience. So we encounter them subjectively. So they're not objective in an abstract sense, and that's kind of what Kant does, but I won't go there for just for the sake of not going too long. But so, with truth, we're talking about an element of reality that connects with our intellect, our mind. And so we have these intellectual capacities in the soul, which is that we have reason. And truth connects with our reason, which is to say that we understand things as they actually are. We understand reality as it is. And this doesn't have to just be in the sense of lengthy, logical argumentation, but this is just you in your daily experience see things, and as soon as you see a thing, your mind recognizes it, right? You have this kind of intuitive knowledge of what things are because your mind is working. And you know that, like, okay, to get back to the chairs, like if I'm going to sit down, I don't have to worry if I'm going to have somewhere to sit because my reason recognizes that's a chair, and chairs hold my weight, so I'm going to go sit in it, right? But then, of course, there's reflective reason, which goes well beyond that. So that's truth. We have an understanding of the world as it is. Then we have goodness. And goodness, I'm speaking here particularly about moral goodness, but we can talk about goodness in other ways. But moral goodness is a sense that there are good actions and there are evil actions. Right? There are things that are that actually align with a standard by which good and evil are actually judged. Those things, good and evil, actually matter eternally, not just my subjective experience or what I think makes me feel good or something like that. And then beauty is difficult to define. I think unlike the other two, there's no easy definition of beauty, and I think that's some of the difficulty I think that people have in seeing beauty as objective, because it's not quantifiable, But I think that's what's so wonderful about beauty too, is that beauty is something that we encounter that brings us in a way outside of ourselves, something that brings us delight, something that brings pleasure. And I think beauty brings us delight and pleasure not in the same way that, something kind of something that just quickly kind of engages your senses might do. So like, I don't know, you see like movies that are just very flashy and really fast and all this stuff happens. Like, well, when you're watching that's not really a sense of beauty. That's more just that you're like your eyes and your ears are just being inundated with stuff. Yeah. So we're talking beauty. We're talking something beyond that. Something that's deeper. That's deeper than that. That we recognize a value in for what it is. And so there's this deep connection between beauty and then affection. So that to see something as beautiful, we understand something to be as beautiful. The beauty in a thing, in an object, in an idea, in a person, draws out our affections. It like causes us to love in some way.
Yeah. So, building on that, when one makes a judgment about something is true, something is good, something is beautiful, that seems to suppose objective entities of truth and goodness and beauty. And so I understand that this relates to the metaphysical question of realism and nominalism, especially in a moral setting. So why should one care about such a philosophical question?
Yeah, and so sometimes when you're talking about these philosophical questions and trying to explain to people what they are, the immediate response is going to be like, "What? That's so like abstract. Why does that matter to me? Like, what? You can deal with those theoretical problems in the classroom, but like, what? Why does the average person have to know this thing or think about these things?" So realism and nominalism. Realism, they're always hard to explain succinctly, and I always try. But realism is the notion that ideas are real, or universals are real. In other words, when I use a word to identify something, I'm referring to something that is real in reality. So if we're talking about human nature, in other words, if I am a realist, when I say human, that means something. Like the word is referring to an idea, and that idea is instantiated in individual people. Right? Meaning that you understand that there is this connection in your mind between your idea of human, and then when you see a human being, what that is. Or think of, oftentimes, like Thomas Aquinas uses the example of triangularity a lot. You know, you have an idea of what a triangle is in mathematics, and you see individual triangles in your experience. Things are triangular. Now, they may not all be exactly the same. There are some triangles that are probably not exactly triangles because it might be like slightly curved, you know, when you have like a slice of pizza that might be cut like a triangle. Maybe it's not technically exactly a triangle, but it corresponds to the idea. But the point is you have this connection in your mind with reality. So a triangle is real. What do I identify the pizza as? The slice of pizza basically is a triangle because it shares in a real thing. Nominalism says that these universals are not real. That instead the concepts that we have in our mind are really just ways that we identify things. So it's more of a construct of language, and there are different forms of nominalism. So essentially, well, what is a triangle? Well, it's not really a thing. It doesn't really exist. It's just a category that we've created to describe a bunch of different things. Again, this sounds abstract, as I said, so I understand why people think that. But what this does is that it divorces your mind from reality. Right? Even if it seems like an abstract philosophical thing, so now you're saying when I encounter things, I don't actually know them. Right? So the idea of triangle is just a kind of made-up construct to categorize things. So that means when I see the triangle, do I actually know what a triangle is? Yeah. Do I really understand things as they are? And so, nominalism, I think, if you're going to be consistent with that philosophy, and this shows up in the late Middle Ages, but there are various forms of nominalism, and it kind of dominates modern philosophy. It's like an assumption in modern philosophy that, of course, nominalism is true. Yeah. But I think that is what leads to some of the crisis in terms of feeling like everything is subjective. Yeah. Because there really isn't any way for me to really know that the things happening in my brain actually connect to what's real.
Yeah. So that actually leads me to my final question. So you also you talked about the Christian view of all of these things, truth and goodness and beauty, and I would like to ask, how would you summarize the Christian outlook on truth and goodness and beauty and their objectivity?
Yeah. So when we're talking about truth, goodness, and beauty in a Christian approach, we're not just saying that they're these abstract propositions derived by reason and that's it. That's kind of how Kant describes the transcendentals. He sees them in a different way, but he kind of says, well, it's kind of divorced from our experience. We just kind of reason toward it abstractly. But we would say we're not talking abstractly, we're talking concretely about God himself. Yeah. Right? Truth is a person. The good is a person. Right? The beautiful is a beautiful God. So Jesus says, I am the truth. He identifies himself with the truth. And so when we're talking about the triune God is the true, the good, and the beautiful. And so when we encounter these things in our reality, what we're doing is encountering something that is derived from God himself, right? So when we recognize that something is beautiful or good, we're seeing that there's something in that our nature grabs onto, and we know to be that, to have the property of goodness or of beauty, because that's a reflection of the nature of God in the sense that he's given us. Going back to even that idea of natural law, right? So that we have in our nature this recognition of our creator. And, like Kant talks about this idea of the sublime when he's talking about beauty. And he talks about how, like, there are different kinds of beauty. You could see beauty in a painting, you could hear beauty in music. But sometimes we find beauty in the dangerous. Like sometimes the most powerful, dangerous things, like we can be at the same time afraid of, but also find beautiful. And this is why you have people who are like storm chasers, like why do they do that? There's nothing, it doesn't benefit them to go chase a storm. Like it's seemingly a very dumb thing to do. It's gonna, like, it could harm you. But there's something about like the coming together of these forces of nature bigger than us and the danger that I think is this reflection of this innate sense of that's who God is. Right? God is beautiful, God is good, but God is also great and powerful. And so I think when we recognize those things that are beautiful and true and good as well, we're really seeing a reflection of God.
Jordan B. Cooper, thank you for this interview.
Yeah, thank you.